And I'm going to share the presentation so we can get started. All right. And I'm going to try to keep some of your pictures and stuff up so if you guys need me, I can see you. So tonight's class is about meat quality assurance, and my microphone's working, but not my camera. So for some of you, you know me, I'm Carla Farrand. I'm the 4-H agent here in Garfield County, and some of you may have remembered me from county fairs in the past, but some of you are new. So welcome. This is one of the required classes by Livestock Marketing Committee and the Colorado State 4-H office that we must do for being in 4-H livestock. So we're going to go into the purpose of the program. So our purpose of our meat quality assurance program is to help define your responsibilities as 4-H or FFA livestock producers, to increase the production practices as related to meat quality, and assist you with providing a safe product. So your responsibilities as livestock producers, because each one of you is going to be producing livestock, is to provide a safe, wholesome food to consumers, understand and follow the labels carefully for every feed additive, medicine, or product that we use, and develop a close working relationship with your veterinarian. Do any of you know your veterinarian? Brisa does. She was smiling. I bet Emma does too. So what's important about meat quality assurance is in the food supply continuum, everyone is responsible for the safety of the product. Each segment relies on each other to make sure that the product remains safe. Pork producers, we have a lot of people here doing swine project this year. Start the cycle by raising pigs that are free of residues by correctly using animal health products and medicated feeds. They also learn how to properly transport and care for the animal until it's marketed. So you guys right now are here at this producer. And then we're going to learn, then you have to transport it. Whoops, let me go back a slide. So when we transport, we're transporting to the county fair or to weigh-in. Marketing is something that we do to market our animal to be able to sell it at the livestock sale, or if we raise extras to be able to sell to other families. Harvesting and processing are the part where our animals leave the sale and go to a processing plant to be processed into the different cuts of meats for the people who have bought it. Retail distribution would be if we were selling straight to a grocery store. So like City Market or Safeway. Food service would be like school cafeterias, restaurants. We do have restaurants that do buy some of our food. The consumer is the main person that we're targeting, is the person who's going to buy our animal at fair and is going to put it in the freezer for them for next winter. So there's a whole cycle there of the chain continuum, but all of this is all dependent on your attitude. So are you going to have a positive attitude to be able to raise this animal, to make sure you work with mom and dad on transporting it correctly, and then being able to market your animal, and then when we get to county fair, having the respect not only for your 4-H leaders, but your parents as we're taking care of animals. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's several good practices we must know. One good practice is our client, veterinarian, and patient relationship. So VCPR, I know some of you are taking notes, is an acronym that's in the quiz. And it stands for Veterinary Client Patient Relationship. So that's important as we're looking at decisions about medication. So the veterinary client relationship is about a working relationship with a vet that would advise us and guide us in determining the medications that are appropriate for our animal and the condition that our animal may be in, as well as when we would use them with our project. So does anybody have a client-patient relationship? Who's your patient? Does anybody know who the patient might be? Brisa, who would the patient be?
Your animal.
Your patient's the animal. Who's the client?
Yourself.
Yourself. Okay, so it's important to know the difference so that you can make sure that you're taking care of your animal correctly. So we just showed this. So we have our client, our patient. So the client is you, the 4-H member. You're the client. Your patient would be your animal. Isn't that a cute little piglet? So it's important that you maintain that relationship with your veterinarian so that you can maintain a healthy animal. Okay. So in with our veterinary client-patient relationship, this is the things that the veterinarian is going to provide for you. So the veterinarian must have a working knowledge of the animals that you're going to be raising and or your operation. So if you are going to be a lamb producer and you are going to be lambing out all of your babies, you want to make sure you're working with a vet who understands that whole process. Same way with your beef or your swine or your goats. I know a lot of people are kidding goats right now. So it's important that they understand your operation. The veterinarian is going to accept the responsibility for the administration of drug or medication. They might teach you how to give it, but they're the ones responsible overall for that medication and any prescriptions. They provide continued care and follow up on the administration of the medicine if it was needed. And they're always available for follow-up for assisting and treatment of an animal if needed. Has anybody had to work with a veterinarian to treat animals? Yeah, it's important to have that relationship. So one of our next areas is extra label drug use. And it's abbreviated ELDU. So the first letter of each word. Extra label drug use is the actual use or intended use of drugs in an animal in a manner that does not follow approved label directions. And only a veterinarian can, with a veterinary client-patient relationship, with your animal, can direct extra label drug use. So the veterinarians have advanced training. They can access to scientific literature, the ability to draw their own conclusions from the resources they have about, will this be helpful for this particular situation? And they have knowledge and information to establish and extend withdrawal times. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit with no residue violations. And we'll talk about that when we get to withdrawal times. So do you guys want an example of some extra label drug use? Would that be helpful? So I have a dog who has arthritis because she loves to run and she's getting old. So the vet has told us that when she's ran a lot for the day, we're to give her a baby aspirin at night so that her joints don't swell. Is a baby aspirin made for a dog? No, it's not. It's made for children. So we have an extra label drug use to give her medicine to help her feel more comfortable because she thinks she should run 10 miles a day. And she's 12 years old. So it's not as easy when you're a dog at 12 years. So some considerations for extra label drug use would be increasing dosage. So maybe the prescription says we're supposed to give 1 dose once a day, and the vet says, no, we're going to give it 2 doses twice a day. Changing the frequency or how we're administering it. So maybe it was originally made for a shot and subcutaneous, and they're going to want to do intermuscular, or they're going to change how we're giving the shot. The duration of the treatment, so maybe it's longer. I had a hog that had swine flu that went into swine pneumonia. So they changed the treatment because of how long they were sick. Treating a disease or condition not stated on the label. Like baby aspirin's not typically something you would use to treat arthritis. But for our particular dog, that's what was recommended. Or changing the species or stage of life to be treated. So there's a lot of diseases out there that chickens or poultry get that can also cross over to your hogs, that can cross over to your rabbits. They like to share diseases, as well as some of the things that we get as humans, our chickens like to get. So if we have a really bad cold and a respiratory infection, we can give that to our chickens. So we also have to make sure when we're taking care of ourselves to make sure we're doing it correctly. Producer requirements for extra label drug use is you have to have an established veterinary client-patient relationship. You have to have records showing the instruction from the veterinarian to use it that way. And you have to maintain appropriate treatment records when you're using extra label drug use. What is something that we use in 4-H where you could write all this information down? Risa?
Record book.
That is correct. It is important you put all of this in your health record. So distribution and use of approved animal drugs. So there's several different ones. One is over-the-counter, abbreviated OTC. And that means it can be purchased by anyone from places such as farm supply stores, an animal health salesman, a catalog, a veterinary clinic. Sometimes you can even get them at your regular stores like City Market, Walmart, okay? Prescription medication. Anything that's a prescription requires a prescription from the veterinarian. And the drugs that are used that are regulated by the Food and Drug Administration requires veterinary oversight for those labeled uses. For that simple reason, to protect us, but also to protect our animals, that we're not giving them too much medicine. Typically, we can get these filled with veterinarians, and that's an important thing to remember in your test, is the veterinarians would be where we would get prescriptions. However, a lot of our vets where we live here in rural Colorado give us the prescription to take to a pharmacy to get filled. And or they work with particular feed stores who have like a pharmacy within them to get them filled. So we have some extra places here, but for test purposes, you can only get it from a veterinarian. Do you guys get that? So a veterinary feed directive is called a VFD, and it's medication intended for use in or on animal feed. So a lot of times we'll buy medicated feed like swine or poultry to give to our animals when they're really young to protect them and make them healthy. But we have to have a veterinary feed directive, which means our vet has to tell us we really should be using that. So if we use over-the-counter products in an extra label manner, again, this goes back to that baby aspirin for my dog, we have to have that veterinary client-patient relationship. The instructions have to be provided by the veterinarian and are followed by the caretaker. So who would be the caretaker for your animals? Mr. You, Bevins, Emma's pointing at herself. Good job, guys. Yourselves, you're the caretaker. So the withdrawal time has to be established and assigned by the veterinarian. And we've got to identify the treated animal and how it's maintained. So we have to write down our animal that we're giving this medicine to and how we're doing it. Where are we going to record that at?
Record book.
Record book, you're right. So the treatment record is important. We have to keep all of those, and it's required we keep them for at least 1 year for any extra label over-the-counter product. So even when you guys get your record books, you have to keep them for 1 year after you've turned them in and you get them back. So the biggest thing to remember is that when using drugs or medication in a manner different from the manufacturer's label, it is not legal unless it's administered by or on order of a licensed veterinarian. Extra label use of feed medications is not allowed, not even by a veterinarian. So giving extra medicated feed is not allowed past a certain time for each animal. So how do we avoid drug residue? It might help us to know a little bit about what drug residue is, right? So drug residue is basically a chemical left behind in the animal's body that if we ran a blood test on it, we could screen for it. So some really large shows do a drug residue test, like National Stock Show down in Texas does. I know the National Stock Show in Arizona does. Sometimes our National Western Stock Show runs a drug residue test. There's sometimes State Fair even runs a drug residue test. So it's important for us to know that we want to make sure of our withdrawal dates of when the time we're supposed to start giving medication till we end, and we follow that. So we want to record the dates of treatment. So you can write it in your record book, you could put it on a calendar, but you want to record when you're giving the medicine, what the name of the product is that you're administering, and this is all eventually going to go in your record book. You want to record how much did you give? Was it 1 cc's, 5 cc's, 10 cc's? Was it milliliters? And then you're going to record the withdrawal date and time. So from the last date you gave the medicine until the medicine is out of the animal's body, that's considered a withdrawal date. And then we want to record the identity of the person who administered it. So do some of you give the medicines to your animals? If so, that's going to be who gives it. But if mom and dad gives it, would that be who you record in your record book? That would be a yes, okay? Or the veterinarian gives it. So good production practice number 2 is establish and implement an efficient and effective health management plan. So a health management plan is dependent on three things here. We want to develop and maintain our vet client patient relationship. We want to develop health plans for our animals, working with the vet, like how do we make it where it's a safe place for our poultry and our swine to be in the same area but not make each other sick. And we need to develop a biosecurity plan. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. A herd health plan is designed to address potential and current health challenges and to help prevent diseases from coming into your operation or your property. So that plan includes, when do you give all the vaccines? And this is going to be for people who are raising all from the mamas to the babies. Does that make sense? So if you're going to be raising your own to even sell to other 4-H'ers, you want to have a vaccination plan. You want to include treatment guidelines for common diseases. So a common disease for some hogs is actually swine flu, believe it or not. And many years ago, we had swine flu that humans got. For rabbits, it might be RSV. So what are some common diseases for that particular species of animal? And then you want to help prevent and control any disease outbreaks. So keeping all of your animals healthy. So, and part of that is biosecurity. So that's taking all of our management practices, everything you guys have learned to prevent the introduction of diseases, but also prevent those agents from getting into your herd. So one of the things you have to do is clean your barn, your stalls, your pens, and disinfect them. If you have mice, you want to put some down some kind of rodent control to keep them away. And then caretakers and visitors, you want guidelines for them. So you're not going to just let anybody into a facility where you might be having babies, because they might bring diseases that you don't want to come into your facility. And follow security measures. So a good way to look at biosecurity is how many of you are told by mom to clean your room? Is that like a project? Clean your room, pick up your laundry. Okay. So I see some head yeses. I see some hands raising. So mom has a biosecurity plan for your house. That involves picking up your dirty clothes and taking them where they're supposed to be, making your bed, maybe making sure you don't have any leftover food in your bedroom that might attract ants. Does that make sense? Because if you have all that stuff laying around your bedroom, what's going to happen in your bedroom? Is it going to get really smelly? Would things maybe start growing? Okay. Waylon, did you have a question, or is that just to check in with me, say, yep, I got that?
Just to check in to say, yes, I got that.
Okay. So even though we don't particularly like to have to clean our room or help do all of that, that's part of mom's biosecurity plan for us at home. Okay. So external biosecurities, which is help you keep diseases out of the herd. So would you commingle your animals with somebody else's when they're babies? No. So that's one of the things, people from the outside coming in because you had a whole new bunch of babies that want to come play and touch. Is it good to have them come in? What if you're selling those babies? Would you want them to see them? You might want them to see them, but you're probably going to make them wash their hands, put on booties, maybe have gloves on, and make sure they're not sick, right? Because you don't want your animals to get sick. So internal biosecurity is keeping diseases already in one or more areas from spreading. So like when I had my pig who had swine flu, what do you think I did? Waylon.
You isolated it from the rest of your herd?
I did. I isolated it because it made it important for my other hogs not to get swine flu. But it also made it easier for me to give them a shot twice a day, because hogs aren't the easiest to catch to give shots to. So other external biosecurity we need to pay attention to is wildlife. So controlling wildlife and pests from contacting our animals. And we do that by putting up fencing, or we have bird screens put up so we don't get, the raccoons love to play with our chickens. And when they play with the chickens, we usually lose some chickens. So it's important for us that we keep them safe. So we got to prevent those external biosecurities from coming in. When we're purchasing new animals, we want to ask our veterinarian how we discuss the health maintenance program for new animals coming to a farm that may already have some established animals. Do we need to keep them segregated for a while and quarantine them all before we bring them together? And that's, again, establishing that isolation and quarantine facility when we're introducing. But we also want to limit the number of visitors who might be coming in contact with our animal. And as we're limiting them, if they do need to come in, because maybe they're purchasing animals for us so we can make some more money for our 4-H project, we can consider supplying disposable plastic boots and making sure everybody washes their hands. Because if I walk on my farm and then I go to Sam the Bevins farm, and then I go to the Olson farm, and then to the Roman farm, have I spread a lot of germs? I have. So if you made me, because am I going to wash my shoes between each visit? Probably not. So putting booties on is the safest way to protect everybody. If you're going to go check out other animals or look at purchasing animals, going to other livestock shows, make sure you have clean clothes and boots for when you're there, and then change those clothes before you get home to deal with your other animals. So when you get home to take care of your own animals, you want to change clothes so that you have clean clothes on and you're not bringing all the stuff from the different fairs or expos back to your animals. Does that make sense? And limit the equipment and tools. Like if you have specific show tools, whether it's a bee stick, a show stick for a hog, make sure you clean and disinfect it between different shows. I know a lot of people like to do jackpots, but we don't always think about cleaning and disinfecting our tools. Okay, so that's important. If we're using scales, or when you guys come to the fairgrounds to weigh in, we disinfect the scales between every family. Why do you think we disinfect the scales between every family? Risa.
So even if there was like bacteria from one animal, it can't get spread to any other animals.
That is correct. We don't want to spread anything because we're asking everybody to come in and be tagged. So that's why we're going to have assigned times to make it easier for us to monitor everybody coming in. So internal biosecurity is establishing a routine veterinary visit to kind of help us check out our herd if we have lots of animals. Make sure we're cleaning and disinfecting between groups of animals. And we should also clean and disinfect their pens every once in a while, especially if one of them had the scours. We want to make sure we're cleaning up and not spreading anything else to anyone else. And just a routine check and cleanup of equipment, and have an emergency plan for feed and water delivery. What happens if you've got some really bad feed, or you've run out of feed, or there's a wildfire? Do you have a plan for your animals? This last summer, we had lots of wildfire and we had lots of animals that had to move. So creating a plan, where would you go if you have to move your animals? Plan ahead. So number 3 is use antibiotics properly. What's an antibiotic that you guys all know? Mr. Bevan.
LA300 and penicillin.
LA300 and penicillin. Is penicillin used for both animals and people?
You can.
But they're 2 different kinds of penicillin, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So for people who've never worked with giving antibiotics to their animals, they may not understand the difference. So, but understanding the difference is important. So we work with our veterinarian to make sure that we're doing the proper treatment for the illness that we have. We're controlling the prevention of the disease, and we're improving the nutritional efficiency of the animal, because when they're sick, they don't like to eat. So it's important for us to make them better so that they can eat and get the nutrition they need to get better. So responsible antibiotic use is to take proper steps to decrease the need for antibiotics, and we do that by cleaning and maintaining the health of our animals. We want to assess advantages and disadvantages of using antibiotics. We can discuss that with our veterinarian. Is there ways that we can treat this animal without using a medicine? Antibiotics use only when they provide measurable benefits. So typically we give LA300 or penicillin when we really do need to, because something is very sick and we need them to get better. And we want to fully implement management practices described for the responsible use of animal health products into our daily operations. So how do we make everything stay healthy? And one of the other important things is to have that vet and client patient relationship so that we know that we're using the proper antibiotics for what we need. Number 4 is to properly store and administer animal health products. So here we're going to learn that we must read and understand and follow label directions. And we're going to go over a label in our next slide. But that's important when given any medicine. We're going to develop a medication record and an animal ID system. We're going to talk about them so that we know what the medication status is and what our withdrawal date is. We're going to identify animals that we need to treat. Excuse me. Keep records about making judgments about marking animals that have been treated. So maybe it's not the best one to sell. Maybe we sell our other one if we've had to treat an animal. And you got to use the medication records to determine what the withdrawal dates are complete. So let's look at a drug label. Can you guys see this big drug label here? So we have a trade name, which is Omnibotin. We have our active ingredient, which is hydrocillin, and it's suspended in an aqueous suspension, which is a liquid suspension. You've got indications, dosage. So this is particularly used for cattle, lactating or non-lactating. For cattle that are lactating, but also you can use it in dairy cattle, swine, and sheep. Read the entire brochure completely before using this product. Is the whole brochure right here on the screen? Nope, that's just the label. So you're going to read more. There's going to be more paperwork that comes with it. You want to know what the dosage is. So we have our active ingredients here, the omnibotin. Indications, it can be used for bronchitis, foot rot, mastitis. In swine, we use it for pneumonia. In sheep, we can use it for pneumonia. Can I use it in my goats? Nope, doesn't say it can be used for goats. Its recommended dosage is 2 milliliters per 100 pounds of body weight, maximum 15 milliliters a day. 1 milliliter is also equal to 1 cc. So when we're looking at our syringes, some of our syringes say cc. So it kind of tells you how much we can do. It has some cautions and warnings here. And I was looking for withdrawal times, but I'm not reading it right here in front of me. But it should tell you what the withdrawal time is on your label too. I looked at 30 days before treated animals use this drug. So you have to discontinue. So your withdrawal period is 30 days. Okay. And most of them have an expiration date. So you have a lot number, which is asked for in your record book, as well as an expiration date. Okay. So that's important. So where do we store our medicine? This is a question on the test. Are you guys ready for this? Medicines are stored in a clean, dry, dark location. As a rule, once a bottle of medicine has been opened, it should be stored in a refrigerator unless it specifically says not to, or directed by a label or veterinarian. You want to observe medication expiration dates. If a medicine's expired, it will not be working as well as if it's a fresh medicine, okay? So if it's expired, it's not working to its full potency to make it better for your animals. So you want to make sure if it's expired, you learn how to get rid of them properly. So it's best not to use expired medicines. You want to maintain your supply to avoid expired. Maintain drug identity. So if the label comes off, do you know what's in that bottle? Probably not. So it's important for us to maintain that. And we really don't want to store medicine in syringes. Now, there are some medicines that are coming in syringes as part of a prescription, but I haven't seen many of them lately just because of the way the syringes are made and they're needed for a lot of other things. So you want to draw medicines from the labeled bottle and administer them in a timely manner. So stored medication to prevent contamination. There are some bottles that you actually put the needle through the top. We want to make sure that those injectable medications, that top has been cleaned between each needle going in, and that we keep it tightly sealed and stored in a proper place. We want to clean any rubber stoppers before inserting a needle into the vial. We typically use an alcohol wipe, and we want to make sure we're using clean needles to withdraw medicines from. Okay.
Here's what I found.
Any questions so far? Okay. So there's different ways we can give medicine. One is oral, which means we're going to give it through the mouth. And we'd probably be doing that in water or feed. The benefit of giving oral medicines is we don't have to worry about broken needles or injection site reactions. Topical is applying to the skin. It can be sprays, dust, pour-ons, or dips. We do a lot of different types of medicines that are pour-on. We have swine that sometimes get a topical sun protection, right? Is there some white swine that we have to put sunscreen on once in a while? Yeah, because they'll sunburn. The other is injection. So we would inject it into the animal, and we're going to talk about the types of injections. So we would treat the individual animal and treat animals too sick to eat or drink is typically what we're doing. So the injections, there's intermuscular, which means it's in the muscle. There's sub-Q, which is going to be under the skin. So I know most of us have our screens off, and that's okay. I want you to look at your hand and see if you can separate the skin from the top of your hand. So on your hand, see up, like Mr. Bevins is showing. Good job. Thank you, sir. That you would have to get under that skin and on top of a muscle to be sub-Q. Does that make sense? Is that going to be easy for us to do? For some of us, maybe Mr. Bevins might have this handled because he works with his dad a lot and grandfather and mom. But for some of us, we might need a veterinarian's help. Interperitoneal means in the abdominal cavity or in your stomach. Intravenously, so if you look at your arms and you can, like in the crook of your elbow, you see a little blue line for your vein. You have to get that inside that vein. And intranasal is in the nasal passages, so it's going up through their nose. So where do we administer intramuscular and sub-Q injections? There is this little triangle from the ears to the shoulder to the chest on almost all of our animals. So sub-Q is a little bit larger triangle. Intramuscular is a little bit smaller triangle. So it should be in the neck of the animal. We don't ever want to give it a shot in the back end, okay? So we make this little triangle from the ears down to their front chest and up to the right top shoulder. And that kind of gives us an idea of where we're supposed to give those shots. So determining the size of needle to use. If you notice, this bottom one here is a 16 gauge needle. Look how large that is compared to that 20 gauge needle at the top. So the bigger the number, the smaller the needle gets. And then you have to also determine how long of a needle do you need to do the procedure that you need to do. So we have 3/4 of an inch, a 1/2 inch. So if you look to the side, there's a little chart. So baby pigs, we're going to use the smallest size needle we can get, including in length for intramuscular shots. We're not going to give them sub-Q. If it's a nursery pig, we might be doing some sub-Q so that it absorbs longer through them, okay? And then finishing pigs and breeding stock. So as the animal gets older, you notice the needle's getting larger and longer. Why do you think that is? Would it be because they're developing a layer of fat underneath their skin? It might help us to get into the muscle. So number 5, follow proper feed protocols. So one is our veterinary feed directive. It's regulated by the Food and Drug Administration called FDA. And that specifically says that antibiotic drugs added in or on the feed are considered medically important to humans. For example, a lot of them are penicillin or tisaline. So it's important for us to know that feed, because then that medicated feed could also interact with people who might eat the meat if it's not had enough withdrawal period, okay? So you want to purchase medicated feed containing the VFD drug. You must have a prescription from your veterinarian. They don't just always sell it, and it's important to have that vet-client relationship. If you're using a veterinary feed directive, you have to keep those records for 2 years. So your record book would have to stay around for 2 years. So some strategies for livestock exhibitors with medicated feeds. Make sure all your feeds are labeled, especially medicated feeds, and you understand what that label is and you keep a copy of that label, or take the label off the bag once you've emptied it so that you have it for your book. Clean storage and feed equipment that you use medicated feed in before you use that medicated feed, after you used it, and before you put a new feed in, okay? Because you don't want that medicated residue to hang out. Properly identify the animals receiving medicated feeds. Typically, we are feeding like a whole lot of baby chickens, so they're all getting it. Or if we're feeding a lot of baby hogs, they're all getting medicated feed. So you've got to monitor the withdrawal period for all of those animals. And you want to maintain the records of medicated feeds for at least 1 year. But if we're using the veterinary feed directive, we need it for 2. Other things is clean and feed equipment regularly. So don't just clean your feed pins right as you're starting the year and not clean them again until after fair's over. You want to have a weekly or monthly schedule for cleaning stuff. You want to make sure you employ pest controls. Flies are our worst enemy with our animals because they transmit diseases from one animal to another. So if your neighbors, let's just say Cody and Brisa are neighbors. I know you guys aren't neighbors, but if you were neighbors and the flies were hanging out around Brisa's pig and then they went to Cody's pig, would that be nice for Cody's pig? Probably not. So we want to put some fly strips up, kind of control our flies. Inspect your feed for quality and freshness. Make sure that you're feeding them something that is good and fresh that you think if you were a hog you would want to eat, or if you were that animal you would want to eat, okay? And always store your feed in a dry environment. We don't want it to get rained on or hailed on because it'll get wet and it'll get nasty. Number 6, establish animal identification for medication records and withdrawal times. So we identify treated animals several ways. One is by individual animal, or we can identify them by the pin or the whole lot, okay? So proper identification is important, especially when we're starting off with babies. It's also important for us if we have someone who's sick, that we put them in a sick pen or a sick cage so that we can try to separate them off from everyone else. So methods of identification. We tattoo, we may brand, retinal scan, electric ID, ear tag, paint brand, leg brand, ear notch. It's important that we have some kind of good management for how we're identifying our animals in our herd, and we're keeping written records of treatments. Makes it easier if we've got everybody identified. So you want to write down all the information of the animal that's identified so that you can transfer it into your record book and make it easier. So let's look at some of these IDs. The first is a tattoo. So the animals that we typically see tattooed are going to be horses, goats, and rabbits. Sometimes we do have some beef cattle that may have a tattoo, but the tattoos typically are in the ears. And with horses, sometimes it's on the inside of their lip, depending on where they've gotten it done. So branding, we typically brand our cattle. There are some horses that are branded. A retinal scan. So we retinal scan beef, sheep, and goats to go to state fair. And this is a beef retinal scan here in this picture. So it looks like a big tree that has no leaves. So we as humans all have a retinal scan too, that if we took a picture of our eye with this machine, it would give us an image of what the back of our eye is, like a fingerprint. So the reason why we do it for beef, sheep, and goats is it provides a fingerprint identification to identify them, especially if they're going to contest. Electronic IDs. These are also known as 840. And that's an important number to remember. If you have an animal that has any of these kind of 840 tags, these electronic IDs, we cannot remove it ever. Okay? It is unlawful to remove them because that is a U.S. tracking number for that animal. So if you purchase from a buyer who may have these tags in their ears, we cannot take it out. Ear tags, we use basic ear tags for our sheep, our goats, our hogs, and our beef for fair. This is another type of ear tag that some of the goats or sheep may have. It's not typically what we use at our fair. A paint brand. Mr. Jewell probably knows a little more about this. A lot of our sheep producers will use paint and will mark their animals with a different brand number so they can identify them as they're going out into pastures or out into rangeland. So they have a way to count them or to be able to identify them later. with they need to do medication. It's also a way that they're able to identify for lambing and stuff because they've got a paint brand on them, unless they're tagged. Leg bands, we use these for our poultry, whether it be market chicken, market duck, market geese, market turkey. We use an ear notcher for our hogs. So we have an ear notch system for our hogs. So the pig's right ear denotes the litter number, and the left ear identifies the pig number. So the notches symbolize different things, and that's important for us to know. Typically, state fair requires us to have a pig that has ear notches in them for identification, but they're also going to be doing DNA testing this year for that. So if you want to learn more about this, I have a lot of flashcards on ear notches, and we can play some games. Scrapies tags are required on all sheep and goats that are intact, specifically our males, but we may have some of our females that have scrapie tags. If we buy an animal that has a scrapie tag in it, that tag cannot be removed. We have to leave it in there. Garfield County requires scrapie tags, so it's important that we have our wethers with their scrapie tags. And if you need more questions or you have questions about where do you get scrapie tags, if you're going to start raising your own herd, I can help answer those questions one-on-one and get you some information on how do you get them. So a scrapie tag is also considered an 840. Remember I talked about 840 tags? We could do not what? What can we do with them? Can we take them out of the ear?
No.
No.
No. Okay. So the 840 tags are part of the USDA program. They typically have a 15-digit number. Most of the time starting with 840. It can be used on multiple species, and it's used for traceability purposes. So if we buy an animal with this, then it goes through a sale and it goes to a packing plant. The packing plant has to record this number to trace the animal. So it's a tracer ID for the animal. It's unlawful for us to remove them. So medication records, things you have to know for your record book. Why do they call them Scrapies tag? Scrapies is actually the name of the disease that the sheep and the goats get. They have been working to eradicate the disease in sheep and goats in the United States for many years, and they pretty much have it eradicated. So the goal with having things tagged with the Scrapies tags is to be able to track them. So if one of them does test positive, they can find out what farm or ranch it came from by that identification number and go back and test that herd to make sure they're not spreading this disease again, because it will kill a lot of sheep and goats eventually, make them very ill. Did I answer the question? Okay. So I'm trying to keep track of everybody. Medication records. So this is important for your record book. You also will have to turn in a health form for county fair that has the same information on it, and you can take it straight from your record book, which is the animal that you treated, the date you treated, the last day you administered it, what did you administer, even if it's dewormer, what kind of dewormer, how did you administer it, who did it, the amount of it, was it by cc's, was it by a pour on, and what is the withdrawal time for harvest, okay? So this is a page kind of like your record book, but not exactly, but it's close. So we have the date was September 17th. Animal number was 145, so it could be their tag number. They gave him penicillin. It was 10 milliliters or 10 cc's, which tells me it was either a swine or a beef by the amount. It was done intermuscular. Bill gave it, and it has 7-day withdrawal time. So 4-H record books, you have to keep those for at least 1 year after your animal has sold. Okay. If you're turning that animal into your breeding stock because you're wanting to breed with it and it's not been fixed, you can use these records to work with your vet to create a health management plan for your herd. Withdrawal times. So that we talked a little bit about it. It's the period of time required for the medication to metabolize in the animal's body and be broken down and excreted out of the body through urine or through feces. And it's so that the amount remaining in the body at harvest is low enough that it's safe for human consumption. So we find the withdrawal times on the labels, package inserts or feed tags. And sometimes our veterinary actually assigns a withdrawal time for extra label drug use. So we have to have that written down. So how do we calculate that? Because this is a question in your record book. And if you're a senior or intermediate 4-H member, this might be a question on your test to be able to calculate. So if each withdrawal day is a full 24 hours, so each day that a withdrawal period is 24 hours. So you can't say it's just from Wednesday to Thursday. It's like Wednesday at noon to Thursday at noon. Does that make sense? So it's got to be a 24 hours. From the last time you gave the animal medicine, that could be a medicated feed, medicated water, topical or injectable products. So this is how we're going to calculate it. Here's our math for tonight. If an animal was treated at 9 a.m. on Friday with the drug having a 5-day withdrawal period, so first let's count our days. When would the period end? So Friday. So we have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. When we gave it to him last at 9 a.m. on Friday. So we'll be completely through the withdrawal at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. So it would look kind of like this. So Friday at 9, Saturday at 9, Sunday 9, Monday 9, Tuesday 9, Wednesday at 9 means we're done. Does that make sense? Anybody have questions on that? Because I know it is a test question or quiz question. There is no pass or fail. It's just you got to take the quiz to say that you were here in class. Okay. So calculating withdrawal times. Medicated feed or water, the withdrawal time begins when all medicated feed is removed from your feeder or your dishes or your water device, and your water devices have been cleaned and flushed. So it's when you take up all the feed or the water that the medication was in, you completely clean them out. They've dried before you put anything else back in, and no more medication. Does that make sense? Because we want to make sure there's no medication residue. So number 7 is environmental stewardship. Don't know where that came from. We have lots of coloring on the screen. Hold on, just there we go. Thank you, Ashley. All right, so environmental practices. We want to make sure our general site conditions, we understand where our buildings are, where we're going to move the manure to, that we have an emergency action plan, and we have an inspection. So our goal is to protect all of the resources around us as we're doing our project. So daily, weekly, and monthly inspections. So manure storage and disposal method. So where are you going to shovel the manure to and where are you going to keep it at? How are you getting rid of it? If you have insects or rodents, how are you going to control the population? Drinking water and cooling devices. We want to make sure all of our animals have drinking water all the time. If it's getting too hot, how do we keep them cool? That our pens and our alleys and our facilities are free of excess manure so that there's a healthy environment for them. We want to check our fencing before we put the animals in. That's probably something we should check weekly just to make sure nothing's damaged it. Building ventilation, we want to make sure that there's enough air circulation through the building. Any animal products that we might need to dispose of, whether it be hair, maybe it's a chicken laying eggs that aren't, we didn't find them till later and they've been there for a while. How do we dispose of them? We got to make sure we have proper cooling and heating. One of the biggest problems we have with heating is with our poultry, our smaller birds. We got to make sure that we don't catch anything on fire. Proper shelter and shade. All of our animals need shade from our sun because we can get above 100 degrees. And we don't always like to be out in the sun all day long without any shade. So we got to make sure our animals don't have shade. If an animal dies, we got to make sure we're disposing of it properly and that we have an emergency contact list. So there's a list of things that we do daily, weekly, and monthly. The daily one is making sure that we're getting manure out and we're providing that drinking water for our animals daily. The drinking water one is on every quiz. I saw it. So number 8, we're getting there closer, guys, is maintain a proper workplace safety. This is an answer on the test. And I'll tell you, Miss Alice took the test and she told me that was a trick question. So I'm telling you guys the answer right now. Safety is everyone's responsibility. That's the answer, safety. So you as 4-H members and owners of your animals and caretakers are responsible for making sure that safety is included in everything you do, but also everybody who's working around your animal and with your animal. So assigning responsibilities, maybe there's 2 or 3 of you working with the same animal or have your animals together in a pen. So who's doing what? Who's cleaning the water? Who's checking the feed? Who's picking up the manure? And who's doing what? Make sure that someone's always walking around checking the pen to make sure there's no screws sticking out or loose wires sticking out, because if they cut your animal, you might have to get stitches for the animal. Identifying what the hazard risks are for all activities. Allocating resources to ensure safety. Measuring the progress and performance of safety in an environment, and reviewing everything to make sure it's all coming together. And you've not forgotten anything. So hazards. Do we want to always have like water running into a pen on the ground? Hogs might like it. They like a mud pit. But is it safe for us to be walking on the slippery mud, Mr. Bevan? Were you asking a question? You like walking on the slippery mud? No? Okay. So we want to limit who's exposed to the hazards. So if grandma and grandpa decide to come out and check on your project, do you want to make sure everything's cleaned up where they don't fall down? Yes. Thank you, Emma. Good job. So we want to make sure that nobody can fall down, even if mom's coming out to help us or she's helping us for the day with our animals. We want to make sure that mom doesn't get hurt because we all like to eat dinner, right? Yeah. Make sure that animals in your projects, make sure that animals can't get hurt. If there's a big hole or a big hole that a sheep or goat can fall in, could they break their leg? You want to make sure that they can't do that. So you want to check all the surroundings. Make sure you're wearing the appropriate equipment when you're going out to work with your animals. Are flip-flops a good idea for going into the beef pen? No, thank you, Bella. So we want to make sure we have closed-toe shoes on. Yes, Mr. Bevan, I think you're wanting to say yes, but the answer is still no. No flip-flops in with the animals. So an emergency action plan, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is very important for us this year. So when you get the copy of this video, you can go almost to the end. We're about an hour 45 in, or it says an hour 45 in, a little longer than that. It's about an hour in. It'll give you all this little cheat sheet, but you should put this together. So if you have to move your animals, you know all this information. Like, where is your home address? Or if you're storing it at somebody else's, what is the address of the facility where your animals are kept? People who are trained in first aid at the farm, who's trained? who can help if there's an emergency. Where are the first aid kits? Bella's trained, good job. So is Mr. Bevan. Where are the first aid kits, the fire extinguishers, and alarms? Do you have an evacuation plan to evacuate all the buildings at the farm or the ranch where animals might be kept? Is there an emergency farm map? Emergency contact information on the outside of the buildings in case others have to take care of the animals, or if you guys are gone on vacation when something happens. And you always should have yours and your parents' name, a veterinary name, and the phone numbers, as well as the power and electrical company and 911. And the reason why this emergency action plan is really important for us is last year we had 2 major wildfires, didn't we? Pine Gulch and Grizzly Creek. We had a lot of 4-H kids that had to move animals because of the fires. So luckily they got to move them themselves. But if for some reason somebody's coming in and moving all of your animals and they're getting commingled with other animals, you need to be able to identify your animals. Maybe even put on here your animal identification number so you have what animals you have. Okay. So this is important to have an emergency action plan. Protecting yourself. This is very important. Wash your hands before going into the barn to take care of your animals and after coming back in the house from taking care of your animals. Make sure you're wearing water or puncture resistant gloves if you're working with sick animals, because you don't want any of those sick germs to get on you and you transfer them to another animal. You want to make sure you're wearing a face shield or safety glasses if you might get exposed to splashes, especially if it's medicine up into the face. And it's really important that you clean any injuries with soap and water. So if you fall and cut yourself, or if your animal happens to get a cut, we got to make sure it gets cleaned for that animal. But for yourself, you got to go in and get it washed with soap and water and get it taken care of, because you want to stay healthy. And it's best not to eat and drink around your animals unless you are just drinking water. What happens if we spill a soda pop on the floor and the pigs drink it all up?
They can get sick.
They can get sick. So that's why it's important that we're only drinking water when we're in the barns. Okay. So number 9 is proper animal handling and care. So here is the oath that you guys are taking, and you can read it to yourselves at the same time I'm reading it to you. Ready? Your job ethically is to provide feed, water, and an environment that promotes the well-being of your animals. Providing proper care, handling, and transportation for your animals at every stage of their life. Protecting your animal health and providing appropriate treatment, including veterinary care when needed. And using approved practices to euthanize in a timely manner so sick or injured animals that fail to respond to care and treatment are treated with respect. Does that make sense? That's what you guys are taking the responsibility tonight. So again, every day, this is what you should be doing. You should always check your animals every day. This is a question on the quiz. Check every day. When you're looking at your animals, you're checking to make sure everybody's healthy, nobody's sick or injured. They have plenty of fresh water and feed, and all the biosecurity risks and hazards have been dealt with. We want to promote the animal well-being, which means we're going to check our feeders daily to ensure they're working right, because we do not want a feeder that's gotten wet and the feed stuck in it and the pigs can't get to the fresh feed, or the chickens. So we want to make sure the delivery's not blocked. Water availability. We want to make sure that our animals have good water, because good, healthy water for them and clean water keeps them healthy. So last year with the wildfire, farmers and ranchers were worried about water because the ash in the water was not good for the animals. So they were constantly have to go change water if they were giving them actual water in a trough. But even in the creeks, they were having to clean the ash off the water sources to make sure the animals got good, clean water. Water needs to be available all the time. And water, if you've got a waterer hanging up in your facility or sitting on the floor for poultry, it's got to be designed that animals can drink and have as much water as they need. Okay. Ventilation, keeping, especially if we have a closed barn, making sure that it doesn't get too hot in there. We have air control, so a way to allow fresh air in so we can control dust, because if we have a lot of shavings on the floor, that'll get a lot of dust. We need to control ammonia. Ammonia is the smell that we get from all the urine that our animals put off. And it can get really strong for us. If it's really strong for us, it's really strong for the animals. So we got to have proper air ventilation to keep those smells down, but it also means we got to clean our facility. When our pens, our flooring and alleyways, we want to make sure there's nothing sharp sticking out that can cut anybody. That our floor provides good footing where animals are being handled or worked with. The last thing we need to do is work with a steer and the floor is really slick and that steer takes us for a ride and knocks us down because we could injure ourselves and not be able to show him as well. We want to check our chutes before loading and unloading animals to make sure the chute isn't damaged. Feeders, we always have to keep clean, make sure nothing's obstructing them to keep an animal from getting injured. We make sure anything that it has water in it is designed for the animals to get as much water as they need. So if we want as much water as we want to drink, the animals need a lot more, okay? So animal performance, we're almost there, 9 slides, guys. So here are some key words. Average daily gain. That means the amount of weight an animal gains each day over a period of time. We give awards for average daily gain at fair based on weigh-in date in the spring, weigh-in date at fair, and how much your animal gained over that time. That's average daily gain. Feed efficiency is the amount of feed or the pounds of feed required per pound of live weight of gain. So how much feed does it take for a hog to gain 1 pound? Or how much feed does it take for a steer to gain 1 pound? That's feed efficiency. So those can be sometimes confusing, but that's the difference. So now we're going to look at body score. And we're looking at a hog here. So like this first hog, the back end of it is very skinny. It's not round and plump like a typical hog would be. It's emaciated. We can kind of see some of the bones. That's not a good hog. Our next one, he's kind of thin, but we maybe could fill him out. This one here is our ideal hog. You can see the nice round shape. He's got a round all the way around him. It looks like you can still see his creases in his legs, be able to where his knees are, and he can move. The ideal hog will move freely. If they're getting too fat, they're starting to get overweight, you can't see their creases down towards the lower part where their knees are, and they get a little slower. When they're way overweight, you'll start seeing the fat come down and drip and make extra hanging parts, and then their legs are definitely going to not be able to move as easy. And then there's some scores here, so you can actually look more, and if you would like a copy of this to look at body scores in beef cattle, this is how they rate them: as emaciated, very thin, borderline, moderate, good, fat, very fat, obese, and I'm happy to share those. So an animal evaluation. So lameness is when the animal cannot bear weight on one or more of its legs or limbs. We see this sometimes with our hogs when they just sit at the feeder. We can also see this with some of our poultry birds, especially our market birds. There's certain market birds that we have to make move because they will do nothing but sit at the feeder. So you want to limit the amount of feed that they get if they're just sitting at the feeder and not moving from the beginning. We're looking for skin lesions, abscess, wounds, or sores, the position of their ears, nasal discharge, and behaviors. So you take all of this into consideration with your health of your animal, as well as how it's moving forward and moving around. If it's not doing well at all, you've talked to the vet that's not responding to treatment, The only safe, humane way for the animal to be put down is through euthanasia. It has to be done timely, usually with a vet, and it's animals who show no improvement after 2 days of intensive care, which means the vet's there a lot. Okay. It's not an easy thing to do, but it is something we have to be responsible for. So it's one of those things, any animal that is immobilized in a score of 1, not able to gain weight, not moving. So that's important. Safe handling. There are certain things with an animal we have to make sure of that we're handling. One is a flight zone. So it's an imaginary circle that's considered around the animal. So if we put our arms out and we put a circle around us, using our arms to make a circle, and somebody invades that circle, we didn't want to be in it. A flight zone would be where that animal would like take off and go another direction. So they have to know that you're there, because when we're working with our animals, we're entering that flight zone. So that's important to work with your animals so that they're not as scared to work with you during that time. The point of balance is located at the animal's shoulder. We have a lot of animals that are in following or herding groups. They'll group together and there'll be a lead cow that once that lead cow goes out, everybody else follows. So as a handler working with these animals, you've got to act calmly. You can't be sporadic or crazy when you're working with the animals. You want to avoid sudden movements or loud noises that can or other distractions that could cause them to be upset. You want to work with animals at their normal walking pace. So check out your animals. How are they walking? How are they moving? That's the pace you want to use when you're working with your animals. And you want to avoid aggressive handling. Aggressive handling would include using electric prods, loud noises, yelling, making the animal move too fast, moving too many animals in a group. So like if we're moving hogs, we're only going to move 3 or 4 hogs at a time. We're not going to move a dozen hogs at a time because it's not good for them. We don't want to move animals too fast. We want to not overcrowd them in chutes or alleyways. Again, why we're scheduling times for weigh-ins. And we want to avoid rough physical contact with our animals. So anybody who willfully acts in abuse or neglect of their animals is not acceptable and it's not tolerated in 4-H. So any acts outside the accepted production practice that could cause pain or suffering to the animal is not allowed. We have to make sure that we're purposely using prods or our sticks when we're working with our swine. We want to make sure that we're not using them on the sensitive part. So we're using them on their shoulders or their rump, but in a gentle way. We don't want to be using on their eyes, their ears, or nose. We don't want to be using them in a manner that could hurt the animal or leave marks on them. And we want to make sure that we're feeding our animals. Not giving them food and water is considered an act of abuse for that animal. So we want to make sure they have plenty, okay? And our last good practice, number 10, is utilize tools that you have in your arsenal to continue to improve. So one is understanding the importance and education of all caretakers. So teaching everybody how to properly take care of your animal. Use appropriate resources to evaluate the records and facilities. So use your record books to what worked good, what didn't. Write some notes. Maybe something worked better than others. And always be an advocate for agriculture. There's a lot of resources in our valley that can help us make the best better, but also make 4-H better. And we can always connect up with those resources to help us do everything the best that we can do. Because in the end, meat quality assurance is a commitment that quality begins with you. And from this quality beginning with 4-H, this is now moving over into production agriculture, where production agriculturalists are taking classes just like 4-H. So questions?